We're about to go on to the next panel, but what I wanted to do while they are leaving the podium is I wanted to make one comment about each of them briefly to illustrate what I believe is an underlying strength of MIT entrepreneurship, and that is the collaborative structure that has evolved with all of those organizations plus more. Going down the line, when I discovered Sandy Pentland was teaching entrepreneurial courses in the Media Lab, I went over to talk to him and we started double listing his courses as Sloan courses also, so that Sloan students would see his courses as things they could take without asking for special exemptions. When the GLab Center was created, before anybody knew there was such a thing, I met with Charlie Cooney in my office a month before he was announced as the director so we could discuss how GLab and the Entrepreneurship Center could collaborate. And in the press release announcing GLab, it said, the Entrepreneurship Center at MIT will work with the GLab Center to attempt to accelerate the transfer of MIT technology to the market. If we turn to if we turn to Sherwin, the Venture Mentoring Service, the original proposal for the Venture Mentoring Service was written by the then head of the Department of Aeronautical Engineering and Ken Morse, who was the managing director of the Entrepreneurship Center. It was even then intended to be a joint activity between the Sloan School Entrepreneurship Center, then Sloan School was considered as that, and the engineering school and the like. And when we come to LEDA, the first assignment in the I-Teams course, which is necessarily mixed teams of engineering students with Sloan students attacking problems that come out of research of MIT, the first assignment is go to the TLO and learn how you can use their system so as to investigate the comparative field in which your project relates. And I will say something that LEDA has always stressed to me. They don't just see their first mission as impact, they really see their first mission as education. And they have done an enormous job with students and faculty to educate them about things. So what has happened over the 25 years from when we started the Entrepreneurship Center is we have had the good fortune of partners who came into being with a sense that this place wants to have strong collaboration across the entire institute. I will tell you that does not exist at other universities. So we think it's a precious strength of MIT. Okay, the next panel is how have we gone about extending MIT research to create efforts and impact upon the rest of the world. And I want to introduce Fiona Murray as the chair of that panel. Fiona came here from abroad. She came here from a position at Oxford University. She was earlier a PhD from Harvard, focusing upon environmental chemistry and then environmental policy. But she went home to England to become a professor of innovation at Oxford. Fortunately, one of our faculty, Mike Cusimano, discovered her at a conference. And she was talking about the fact that she was alone in trying to build a program at Oxford and how hard it was. And Mike said, how would you like to take and spend a semester at MIT? It would be lovely. We would love to have you. And then we did our best, once we had her at least in Cambridge, to try to steal her, and we succeeded. We got her to stretch one semester to 2 semesters, and then with great embarrassment, it forced the Dean of Sloan to call the big man at Oxford to apologize for our bad behavior. We offered her a faculty position at MIT, and she has survived that transition from England back to Cambridge. Fiona today has not only done extraordinary work in innovation and entrepreneurship, but she has moved to a position of leadership and responsibility. She is the Associate Dean for Innovation of the Sloan School of Management. She is the co-director of the MIT Innovation Initiative, and I would suggest to you that those new roles are speaking to the future of entrepreneurship and innovation at MIT. So, Fiona, your panel, take over. Thank you very much.
Panelists to come up onto the stage. Ed has been very kind in his introduction. I think my main qualification for the panel that is about things international is that I have a foreign accent. Although I don't think I sound foreign, I think everybody else does. So let me have everybody come up. So before we begin, I'm just going to very quickly introduce our panelists. We have Konrad Debacker, who graduated from MIT and from Sloan, and who now basically leads one of the major universities in Europe and really thinks a lot about how to bring innovation entrepreneurship to that part of the world. Georgina Campbell, who you will notice when she speaks, has an accent quite similar to mine from the same country, has a similar journey of somebody coming from the UK, from Oxford, over to MIT and really finding this such a special place to be. We were very fortunate that she agreed to come back from working at the World Bank to lead our LegArtem Center, and before that, our REAP program. Doug Hart, as Doug mentioned, he is the only person on this panel with engineering in his title. Doug is a real professor of engineering over in the School of Engineering in the Mechanical Engineering Department. That doesn't necessarily tell you very much about what he does, because as we were talking about earlier, your department doesn't always give you a sense of the precise kind of research that you really do, but Doug has been tremendously involved in a lot of our international programs, and I think he will talk about that. And then Yashang is my very dear colleague and an associate dean at Sloan for international, and so really he is a person who thinks incredibly hard about how we need to connect out into the world, including his own work on China and GLab and other such things. Doug, thank you especially for being on this panel. You are the honorary American on this panel, and so we're very grateful for you to be willing to sit on the stage with those of us.
That's a positive thing right now.
Nor is it being British, I think, given whether or not we're European. So we could have a lot of discussion about that. But what I'm going to do is, in the interest of time, I'm actually going to see whether I'm going to make up time so that we get you to your tea break. Again, being British, tea is extremely important, and so I will get everybody to their tea break exactly on time. So we'll run under the hour. And so what I'm going to do is just ask, and I think, Konrad, I'd like to start with you, if I may, just to really help us understand how you've tried to build something that probably looks a little like MIT in some ways, but is uniquely its own in your part of the world, and whether you'd share a few ideas about that with us.
Thank you. Well, I'm honored to be back at MIT. It's always a pleasure to be visiting a group of good old colleagues, but friends in the meantime. And on the instruction of Ed, I prepared a few slides, not too many, but just to give an impression and also to pay a tribute to Ed, because he's one of the people, together with Tom Allen and Jim Utterbeck, who really gave me a lot of inspiration and ideas as to what is happening in Leuven today. So very briefly, I think it's an issue also of being versus becoming, because in the sense that in the MIT environment, and we heard a lot of it today, there is an ecosystem that is present. It pulls entrepreneurs towards the environment, towards the region, and it offers a lot of opportunity. There is excellent science, but there is also excellent experience in entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial ventures. When you come back to Europe, you see that this environment isn't there, so you have to push it to a larger extent. And we're actually 4 cities in Europe that work very closely together. It's the Eindhoven region, it's the Aachen region, it's the Leuven region, and it's the Heidelberg region. And in each of those regions, you have a number of core institutions that really try to push entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial activity around a university and building a university ecosystem. Leuven is a very small city, 100,000 people, 100,000 inhabitants. The university dates from 1425. There is one institution in Leuven that is older than the university. It's the brewery. We're the home base of AB InBev, so the headquarters of the brewery are in Leuven. And actually, it's important that the brewery existed already in 1366 because the two first streams of income of the university were levying a beer tax on all the beer consumed in Leuven in the 15th century, and in conjunction with this, exploiting the city jail. So this gave the university its first two income streams, and it was like related diversification. When getting back to Leuven, after having spent some time in the Netherlands at Erasmus University, we started building a community and an ecosystem, having had some entrepreneurs that were quite successful with their companies. And so we had some role models, but we needed to build an ecosystem that put more emphasis on mentoring, inspiring, and achieving entrepreneurial success. And this was done in Leuven through two actors, two institutions that played a major role. On the one hand, Leuven Research and Development, which is the tech transfer activity of the university. Just some idea about what we do, just some highlights. And IMEC. IMEC is the Microelectronics Center, which is located in Leuven and which is a large center funded by the government, but also a lot of collaboration with private industry. It's about 2,500 researchers working in the area of nanoelectronics. So we had to build that environment, and we built this environment building on the shoulder or standing on the shoulders of those two organizations. In the meantime, we were able to attract quite some venture capital to the region. We have about 2 billion in venture funding available in the larger Leuven area. So a lot of emphasis has been put on creating that institutional environment. I call it interweaving and interlocking institutions and actors that help us to build and support that ecosystem. And we are not the only ones because, well, Lita Nelson referred to impact. That's the type of impact we want to have. Given the fact that it's the excellent science base, but also given the fact that we are in a small economy, this means that a lot of our inventions and products go to other companies. One of the first products that became a success was TPA, which was commercialized by Genentech, was a Leuven product. Another range of products that we have on the market now are products that are commercialized by Gilead Sciences. All their HIV products are Leuven-based products. So impact is important for us. And finally, in order to make this even stronger, we have crossed borders because Belgium is so small. So this means that we created this, what we call Eindhoven-Leuven-Aachen triangle, where Philips and Technical University of Eindhoven, University of Aachen, RWTH, and Leuven join forces to be stronger in the European ecosystem of innovation and entrepreneurship. And for us, this is like helping to turn a dream into reality. And this is not unfamiliar to our region because 500 years ago, because his good friend Erasmus was working in Leuven, Thomas More published Utopia in Leuven in 1516. So it's a big anniversary in our universities these days. So this just by way of some introduction and some ways of building an ecosystem in Europe.
Well, Conrad, thank you. And I think one of the things that you highlight, which is something that we think a lot about in our REAP program, this Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program that I think Scott mentioned, and which we created a few years ago along with Bill, Scott, Ed, myself, and now being joined by Phil and others, and Georgina has been part of that. We really do take this stakeholder approach to trying to think about how you really develop an ecosystem, how you work with the university, the entrepreneurs, the large corporations, the risk capital, and also government, and really understanding the role of government as well. But I think MIT is trying to do that in lots of different ways, sometimes working with universities, sometimes with entrepreneurs, and sometimes with corporations. So I wonder whether, Doug, I can turn to you and ask you to give us a little bit of a sense of how we've tried to do this sort of thing, particularly in other parts of the world and with other universities.
Yeah, so a little bit of background for myself. For those that don't know me, I'm a product of MIT in many regards, in that I went through the Despondé Center and the Venture Mentoring Service and through Lita Nelson. And basically I can name just about half the people in this room that turned me from an engineering scientist into an entrepreneur. And since then, I've got a company in Singapore, I've got a company here in Cambridge. I sold my first company that I started with from the Despande Center to 3M, and I got hooked on entrepreneurial education. And then Charlie Cooney pulled me into the international programs when he retired, and I don't know that was a favor, actually. I think that was, you must have been really mad at me for something. But anyway, since then I've got involved in the Skoltech program in Russia, which was founded in 2011 with Ed Crawley as the president. Ed Crawley was the department head from Aero Engineering. And worked with Ilya Dubinsky here. Not sure, I saw him earlier. Ilya Dubinsky is our counterpart. He's another MIT product, and he heads the entrepreneurial group at Skoltech. Started working with them. And Skoltech was an interesting, is still an interesting experiment, if you will. It's a very ambitious undertaking. Charlie was part of that founding group that set it up, and the school itself is set up at its very core and its foundation. Entrepreneurship and innovation are threaded throughout the program. Many things have changed partly due to the economy drop and political strife, but still I think MIT had a huge influence on setting that core foundation up. And I was shocked when I went there at just how starved the students are to receive this kind of an education. Probably more so than our students. Our students have a candy store of classes that we have. There, they don't. And so they were desperately looking for our input. And so while we may not be that successful with the faculty there, that leads to some question, but certainly among the students, we filled a void that was hugely important, and I think that'll be a lasting influence for many, many, many years to come. I'm also involved in the Portugal program, and the dynamics there, that started in 2006. And been, I would say, very successful. We have many, many programs embedded in that. It's now taken off. There's equivalent to our 100K competition that's going on that's doing extremely well. Many companies have spun out of that group. And they've welcomed us with open arms. And through all this, I think there's an underlying factor in the realization in many developing countries, not that Portugal and Russia are developing, but many countries that are developing the E&I ecosystem, let's put it that way, in that that invention without innovation is really somewhat pointless. And so I think they're all striving to achieve what MIT's been consistently developing for, as you say, 50 years. I think there's this, we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. So I think this is a two-way street. I think MIT gets back from these programs. One is we find many fantastic students, and two is we're also learning how to teach entrepreneurship and innovation.
Yeah, Doug, and I would just echo that. I think what's been so interesting about some of our partnerships is that when we're asked by universities and other places around the world, what makes you special? Can you come and bring some of that to us? You actually have to think about what it really is. And many of the things that I think we take for granted actually just turn out to be quite difficult to replicate. And they're often difficult to replicate because although there might be a playbook that Leon has or Sherwin or Lita, to actually incorporate that playbook into another place and to actually have all the complementary institutions and activities, I think is very hard. I was really struck when I first came to MIT in 1999, 2000, was right sort of in the middle, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, that's in the middle of the Cambridge-MIT relationship. And so this was another of these big relationships, this time with University of Cambridge in the UK. Now, I quite enjoyed that because it gave me an excuse to go home on a quite regular basis. It also confused everybody because my counterpart over there was actually an American. And so we would stand up to give presentations, and people were completely confused that Steve was a Californian who was actually based in Cambridge, and I was a Brit who was based in Boston. And so we would do this, and it turned out to be very hard. Even some of the simple things at the time, lots of the conversations about increasing the number of women on the faculty, increasing the role of entrepreneurship in the curriculum, Lots of reasons why people can say to you, no, we've been doing it this way for 1,000 years, so we don't really want to do it any different, or that won't work here. Not invented here, we don't like that. And so I think, Conrad, your ability to transform a very traditional place in these new ways, I think is especially interesting and such a big challenge, but it does force us to understand ourselves better when we are trying to share what we know and what we do with other people. So with that in mind, Georgie, let me turn to you and ask you to give us some of your thoughts, especially about how we kind of go out into the world in some of the developing countries and really share some of the insights from MIT.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Ed and the team for giving me the opportunity to share some of the work we've been doing at the LegArtem Center. So I'm the director of the LegArtem Center, and the LegArtem Center really is about extending MIT entrepreneurship into emerging and frontier markets. Our customer at the LegArtem Center, much like the Trust Center, are the students, the MIT students, but the LegArtem Center, we're providing our MIT students who are looking to explore these frontier emerging markets with the specialized resources, funding, community, education that they'll need to navigate these more complex business challenges and unique challenges that entrepreneurs face in these interesting parts of the world. Our capstone program at the LegArtem Center is our fellowship. And through the fellowship, we build a cohort of around 20 students a year, and we provide them with tuition stipend up to $50,000 a year, in addition to $10,000 of travel prototyping funds to build and scale their businesses. We also give them access to high-touch mentorship programs, along with educational resources, a class, et cetera, for helping them develop the specialized entrepreneurial skills that they need to work in Africa, India, Latin America. More recently, through the LegArtem Center and working closely with the Trust Center, we've actually broadened our portfolio of programs, not only to serve students who are currently building businesses in the developing world, but also for students who are looking to explore and experience opportunity in the context of Africa, in particular Africa, but also India and Latin America. So we offer seed grants, small travel grants, prototyping grants, so students can travel during IAP, the summer, to spend time seeking out challenges that they're looking to solve with their technologies and businesses. We also run a series of activities here on campus to connect the community. So new this semester, we've been doing what we've called a Brunch and Learn series, where we're using the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for highlighting some of the interesting opportunities for entrepreneurs and to highlight some of the real critical challenges that we're looking to solve globally. And then we bring together a community of MIT entrepreneurs, faculty, to talk about how entrepreneurship is currently contributing to the SDGs, but also what more entrepreneurs can do and what more our students can do. So last week we ran a panel with Professor Simon Johnson around financial inclusion, a few weeks ago with Tavneet Suri. And we're really highlighting some of the key challenges that we want our students to focus on. And then through the seed grants and other opportunities, we can get them out to the field as soon as possible to test their hypotheses and to validate their ideas. Something else new this semester is we're actually now, we're trying to create pathways out of MIT for educational programming and thought leadership. So this December, we'll be hosting a conference in London to have a global conversation with a set of diverse stakeholders around the role that entrepreneurship can play in contributing to progress around the world, and in particular, the conditions for fostering the financial conditions for supporting early-stage entrepreneurs in emerging markets. Our philosophy at the LegArtem Center really builds off the MIT philosophy approach, where we strongly believe in the power of innovation-driven entrepreneurship as a way to drive prosperity around the world. And progress. And progress not just in terms of social progress, in solving critical challenges, climate change, access to energy, education, healthcare, but also economic progress through job creation. And I know that this morning, I think you heard from several of our LegArtem alumni, Billicus, from WeCyclers, and Ella, who received one of our early seed grants, the founder of SOCO. And they really are solving some of the world's most critical challenges, but also by creating local jobs, and boosting the local economy. I'll end with just giving you one more example of an alum who I think who really captures what the LegArtem Center is all about. I'm sure many of you have heard of Sanergy, a company based out of Nairobi, founded by David Auerbach, a Sloan alum from 2011, along with his co-founders Annie and Lindsay. Now, Sanergy, essentially, they have these pay-as-you-go toilets that they sell to local entrepreneurs in the slums of Nairobi. Those entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs, then run those toilets as a business. Then Sanergy collects the waste, processes the waste, and turns that waste into organic fertilizer, which they then sell to local farmers, and that's how they make their money. Sanergy, since graduating, so Sanergy didn't exist pre-Sloan. David came to Sloan with the idea of contributing, being involved in the entrepreneurship community, got captured by the kind of trust center, adopted or the trust center energy, and throughout his time here, through participating in classes and competitions, the 100K in particular, was able to move Sanergy or he was able to, I suppose, de-risk Sanergy, so that when he graduated, he was able to launch Sanergy full-time with his co-founders. They're now, 5 years later, serving 33,000 people daily with healthy, clean sanitation facilities in the slums of Nairobi. Not only that, but they're processing, I think, 6,000 tons of waste on an annual basis, daily, and also have created hundreds of jobs. There's 300 people who work for Sanergy in the local slums with an unemployment rate of 40%. That's crazy. Also, they've created, there's 300 local entrepreneurs, franchised entrepreneurs who are running the toilets. And those people have hired 150 local people to work for them. So the job creation that's coming, they've created through Sanergy is having huge local impact, not just, and like I said, not just economically, but also socially by having impact. So I'll end there.
And thank you. And I think what this has done, and especially the work that we've been doing in the LegArtem Center and that Georgina's been leading, and that really does connect the dots to the Media Lab and development ventures and so many other things on campus, I think starts to have us really think hard about whether or not we can actually begin to create conditions for entrepreneurship and innovation in places that don't have all the key underlying institutions that we just take for granted here. And I think even in Europe, we take a lot of these things for granted. And so we have to sort of ask ourselves, what can we do? And what are the things that we need to change? We can send our students there, but we probably also need to change some of the underlying conditions as well, and give policy advice, try to shape the universities and work collaboratively, but in ways that really recognize that everywhere is different. And perhaps no one better understands that, I think, and how hard it is to build those relationships, but really to make them effective than Yashang. So Yashang, let me turn it over to you. I know you've been given strict instructions from Ed as to some of the topics that you must cover, because Ed has some very clear views about that, but I'm going to let you can both be on message and off message.
Okay, so I'll let Ed judge whether or not I do a good job. Let me start with a story and then with some observations. The story illustrates the point you also made, that sometimes these international activities can turn out to be extremely interesting but also surprising, right? So in 2008, we created a course called China Lab, in which MIT students work with Chinese students in the same team to provide solutions to entrepreneurial companies in China. So our thinking was that by doing this, we can go deeper in the entrepreneurial environment in China because it doesn't require the Chinese entrepreneurs to be able to speak English, right? So we have collaboration from Chinese students, and they can navigate the local things much better than our students. So in 1 year, we had a team in which the 2 Chinese students from Tsinghua University, one was from Sweden, and the other was from South Korea. And it turns out the Chinese linguistic and cultural capabilities were provided by the MIT students, and the 2 of them were originally from China. So never in my mind I would imagine that not only we sort of showcase MIT, and we're also exporting Chinese culture and Chinese language to China. So that's incredibly interesting. And by the way, a number of the students who have done this, because they form relationship with their Chinese students, they have decided to form the team together to fund and raise capital and run companies there. In terms of the observations, and then I'll talk about the 3 activities that we have done. In terms of the observations, I think, let me make several observations. One is that relative to the scale of our school, here I'm just talking about Sloan School, and not MIT as a whole. Relative to the scale of Sloan School, our international footprint is substantial, right? In fact, I would argue that relative to other universities, our international footprint is also substantial, even though we're a smaller university. Just to give you a sense, each year now we have about 800 students from Sloan, maybe from the rest of MIT as well, participating in Sloan courses, doing action learning courses, 800, right? Harvard is a much bigger school. They have about 800 as well. So that's observation number 1. Observation number 2 is that number is especially impressive in the following sense. Doing international activities is, maybe economists will say, labor intensive, right? But in terms of MIT speak, it is hand intensive, right? So this idea that we do mens and manus, my Latin is not very good, but mens and manus, right? Using brain and hand. When you do international activities, it is by definition a hand intensive activity. You have to, because none of this is codified, right? And you can't really transplant this by sending an email. You have to do it there. You have to showcase these activities there through relative intensive use of our students and our faculty. For that reason, doing international activities, as you know, as Ed knows, I think, is not without controversy, right? And because there's a view that you do so much abroad, that is a substitution for what we do here, right? We can have a debate about whether or not that view is right, but to have that view, I think, is entirely legitimate, given the hand-intensive nature of the things that we do. So let me just mention 3 activities relatively quickly. I'm more familiar with one of them, one of the 3, but I think the other 2 are incredibly important and deserve to be mentioned. One is 100K, right? So 100K is a student-run activity. It has been done in 50 other countries. Our students have gone there and show to foreign universities how to do this, how to do that, right? Replicate that model is extremely difficult, right? So you have to do it in a very hands-on approach. The other activity pioneered by Ed and Jim in the 1980s is faculty engagements with governments, industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and universities in Portugal, in Israel, a number of other countries, how to sort of do the MIT ecosystem, right? And I want to highlight one particular country for emphasis, which is Israel. Ed and Jim were doing research in Israel in the 1980s, collecting data on entrepreneurship, on ecosystem in that country. And at the time when the seeds of entrepreneurship and innovation in Israel were being planted, and all of that became what is known as a startup nation, right? So MIT was at the very beginning of that process, and we should note that particular contribution. The activity that we do now is action learning. So action learning, to grossly simplify, is using our students to do a consulting engagement for entrepreneurial companies in foreign countries and also in the United States as well. And here we have pioneers in the room. Sherry Losberg started doing this in the late 1990s. Ken Morse was doing that. And I benefited from the work that Ken and Sherry did. And we just, so I'm Chinese, so I tend to copy. So I just copy, right? So
Do you shamelessly steal the intellectual property?
Well, I mean, maybe I've been at MIT too long, so I copy and I feel ashamed. Right? So that's yeah. So and now just to GLab was founded in the late 1990s. Now we have 16 courses with 800 students, right? It's really remarkable. So one question is, does a consulting engagement count as an entrepreneurial engagement? I think there are a number of responses to that. One is that we work with entrepreneurs, right? We help entrepreneurs in Latin America. We help entrepreneurs in India, in China. So that's an entrepreneurial relevance. And the other way that I think is relevant is that, as we know, the predominant teaching methodology in a business school is case method. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with case method, although I think there is something wrong with it. One thing, just small thing. Yeah. One small thing is selection bias, right? So the companies that usually succeed want you to write a case about them, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas when we do an action learning project, usually it is companies that have a problem, right? And they come to us and say, well, please solve that problem for us. Mm-hmm. So if you were to ask the question, if you are training entrepreneurs, do you train an entrepreneur more successfully with celebration of business success, mm-hmm. or more successfully with exposing them to problems? I would say the answer is latter, right? So because an entrepreneur is going to deal with all these problems and all of that. And so I think it's entrepreneurial in that sense, even though the format is kind of a consulting engagement. So I would say that actually the ability of MIT to do this action learning has happened through an entrepreneurial path as well. It's not because that there was a central committee or Politburo that dictated action learning. It was really just driven by faculty themselves, and Sherry knows this very well. When GLab was founded, or Ed knows this, when GLab was founded, there was a lot of skepticism whether or not it was going to succeed. Now it has turned out to be hugely successful. And so one of the great things about MIT's system is that we allow people and faculty to do things with some substantial risk of failure, but with also high payoff of success.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you, Yeshang. There are many ways that one could sort of think about all the different things that MIT does. I think one of our responsibilities now is to really educate a whole generation of students who are really global innovators, and they're not just doing their innovation and entrepreneurship here. We know from the alumni surveys that Ed pioneered and that we had the chance to do together that about 30% of those students and alums start their businesses here in Massachusetts, but the rest of them are setting up businesses all over the world. And so there is this sort of export of talent and ideas that's so important. So I think we owe it to our students to really give them an understanding of what it's like to do business and to do entrepreneurship and innovation all over the world, including, as the LegArtem Center does, in some really complicated places. But I think that next level up is to say, and how do we change those places? We're not really satisfied, I don't think, with just sending students there. We actually want to then go in and see whether we can change their universities or all those institutional pieces, and whether it's in Portugal or in Russia. whether we send our students out to lead major universities in Europe and elsewhere, I think that there's tremendous opportunity. And the other thing that I think is really important is that I feel like we also have a responsibility. And this is something I felt very strongly in our REAP program, where we have teams worldwide. And in our third cohort, we have a team from Israel, from the city of Ashdod. And we also have a team from Saudi, from the second holy city of Al-Medina. And so first, there's just something profoundly interesting about seeing those two teams sit side by side among a cohort of 8 different regions around the world. And frankly, are more similar than they are different in their aspirations around entrepreneurship and innovation. And that, I think, has been a very important lesson and a reminder to us that this is an area where I think we can actually make a difference in a global sense. But the other thing that happened to us is that as each of the teams was presenting, the team from Saudi stood up in the first workshop and gave their presentation, and they talked about their tremendously beautiful buildings and their investments and so on. And I noticed something very particular about the team that wouldn't come as a surprise to really any of us, I don't think, which was the team was made up of 9 men. And fortunately, because we're doing this quite complex global program, we have among the faculty team our colleague Phil Budden, who's over there. Phil is a diplomat by training. And I turned to him and I said, do you think it would be undiplomatic to point out that there are no women on the team? And I'm grateful for Phil's response to me, which is that he said to me, if you didn't mention it, that would be as much of a statement as if you did. And so after the team finished, I congratulated them on their presentation, and I said to them, your presentation is tremendous, but I really hope that when you come back for workshop number 2, that you'll make sure that the other 50% of the potential entrepreneurs and innovators in your country are basically represented. I've had a chance to be in Saudi, and in fact went on a trip there, and Ken was with me on that trip with Laura. And I had a chance to meet many quite tremendous and awe-inspiring female entrepreneurs in Saudi. And so I recognize that it's not as if there weren't people that they could bring. And there's something about, I think, the responsibility that we have with MIT as our platform, that we do have to actually talk about some of these rather difficult and uncomfortable issues sometimes, just like we have to talk about entrepreneurship and innovation and its role in inclusion and economic development more broadly. So I think it's a real privilege to get to work on some of these issues. There are a lot of people in this room who've got a huge amount of experience in bringing some of these ideas and things out into the world. Some of you like, Chris, where are you? Chris, you've been tweeting, so I know you're paying attention. I'm just going to call on you. Instead of people asking questions, I'm just going to call on people and ask them what they think. So just turn around. So Chris, you have gone from being here and being in other US universities to sort of basically having a role very similar to ours in Switzerland. So I don't know whether you'd just share with us a few of your thoughts about how to do this in this more global context.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm at EPFL in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is one of the Swiss, like the National University of Switzerland, the campus in Lausanne. And EPFL has been a sort of a national university about 50 years. So we're actually quite a bit behind MIT progression in the development of an ecosystem there, although it's something that they really, really aspire to and really trying hard. Last year, they were very proud to note that 50% of the venture capital invested in Switzerland is invested on the EPFL campus. One thing I noticed from today's discussions that I thought was very interesting is that while faculty entrepreneurship it's a piece of the portfolio of MIT, and there's a big, big emphasis here on students and alumni. And we haven't gotten to that point yet. So I think it's a good place to start when, there's been a big, big emphasis on spin-out companies, making, grant for postdocs to create something and to give some seed funding to professors, et cetera. So that's where almost all of our efforts have been focused for the last, I would say, 10 years or so. And I think now we should be branching into more of the student alumni, trying to encourage more, get the education component a little bit more built up. So that's my preliminary reaction. Thanks.
Interesting. Thank you, Chris. And so now it was actually Ken's idea when I said to him, how do we make sure we get a bit lively before tea time? And he said, just call on people. So Ken, I'm just going to turn the tables and call on you because in the time since...
So
You thought you were exempt, but you spent a bunch of time thinking about entrepreneurship and innovation now in Spain and other places in Europe. So, and we've spent time around the world thinking about this. What are your reactions?
I think it takes people like Koen, like you, like Ricard Huguet in Barcelona, and like Osman Boyner and Özlem Denizlem in Istanbul, making a 20-year commitment. Koen, I guess 20 years was you're now on your second 20 years.
96.
But you,
I started in Leuven in 96, so it's 20 years.
yeah, so, and it was, but you know, you're a case study in transformation of an ecosystem, and you've worked on it day and night for 20 years. And I think the Cambridge MIT Institute, Michael Scott Morton,
Michael's
still,
right here, so
yeah, right.
He's hoping I don't.
If
call on
anybody
him.
were to stand up and take a bow, it would be him. He created that with others. It was a sustained activity for 6 years, enormously impactful. And I just think that there are so many people who come to MIT and want to take home innovation in a plastic bag and spread it around like pixie dust in their home environment, and that isn't what it takes. It takes a sustained commitment by smart people who build teams and never give up, and who also atomize. The previous panel is a great example. Each one of those people has been at it for 15 years, and that's what you guys are doing. So if you're just 3 years into it, you know, you're just 3 years into it, and don't give up. Invite everybody else in the room at the cocktail party tonight to come and help you with the activity, and you'll be surprised how many takers you'll get. That would be...
Thank you, Ken. Lisa. So you're saving somebody from being called on, so that's very good of you.
In a number of countries with which MIT has worked, they've brought innovation centers very similar to Deshpande, to the point where Deshpande has become a generic term. Yeah. And they've been very successful at working with faculty, research results, students, and again, I'm talking about early stage, research-intensive technology, to get companies formed. And in some of those countries, once you get a company formed, assuming you're reasonably sensible, you can get the first $500,000, even $1 million from various government schemes of one sort or another. I'm using schemes in the British, not the American sense. And then they fall off the cliff because there's no early stage private venture capital. And one of my observations is that one of the reasons, in addition to just tradition and conservatism, is that early stage technology-based, biotech, IT, whatever, venture capital involves people who not only know investment, but who know technology. So that it's a different profession from a venture capitalist investing sovereign wealth funds. How do we get that profession started in places like much of the Middle East, Singapore, other such things?
I think, Lisa, that's a great question. I don't know whether... Sherry, do you have some thoughts on that subject? Or you get to ask your own question and then answer it, I think, like all good faculty.
I don't mean to do a commercial for it, but you know, there is a wonderful thing called the Kauffman Fellows Program,
yes.
And that's actually their day job. And I wouldn't be shocked if there isn't a Kauffman Fellow who is an MIT alum in the room. But if not, we've had probably more than a dozen over the years. But they really do, in addition to the beefy blonde guys out in Silicon Valley, they also have bent the mission to really reach out to emerging and frontier markets. Yeah. So it exists. Yeah.
So, all right, Sherry, thank you. Now I think Yashang, you
Yeah, so maybe it's not exactly on this topic, but I think it's related, right? So if you think about the Soviet system, right, of research, it was producing, some very good research, basic research, but there's no translational mechanism to take that research into economic development. And that's why I think one of the reasons the country collapsed. We're doing some study on Chinese history, right? We're establishing a data set on historical inventions in Chinese history. Lots of inventions. But there was not this translational mechanism to take that into economic development. And the country didn't develop. Industrial revolution happened in the West, rather than, there's a famous puzzle, right, Needham puzzle, which is how come China pioneered in so many technologies and inventions, but failed to benefit from all of that. And that translational mechanism is missing. If I look at Chinese universities today, it's very interesting. It's kind of divided. So now they recognize the translational mechanism without having the kind of translational mechanisms that we have. Oh, they recognize the translational imperative without having the mechanism. What has happened is that the professors invent something, then the professors themselves take the whole thing to product, they become managers, and they, the last thing you want is to have a professor to be the CEO. And maybe not the last thing you want, but at least a professor like me. So so essentially,
you don't want the business school professors to be CEOs. You might let the engineers do the job. I think
engineers are totally different. Yeah, so you could have two scenarios. One is that the professors don't do a good job managing the company. And the other is the opportunity cost of doing this, because the professors, because they spend so much time doing the management, they're no longer doing the research, right? So essentially, how do you work this balance between research, basic research, and entrepreneurship and translational impact? It's actually extraordinarily hard. And many people they think that MIT is about making money, right? So exactly the point you made, right? Rather than emphasizing impact. So they encourage professors to go into business. And then you stop their scientific career because of that.
That's fascinating. Conrad, I think you may get the last word here. So
just a brief reflection here. We always have to give time the time needs to accomplish something. And this means that when you try to do those types of schemes in other countries, you need to understand the institutional environment and how far you can go within a couple of years. We started last year a program for entrepreneurship and innovation cooperation with Central and Eastern European universities, the leading universities in Central and Eastern Europe. It's only now, 25 years after the Berlin Wall, that they start being ready as a society to absorb this type of activity. So you have to understand when you embark upon which type of effort. And there I can see, for instance, with Charles University in Prague, we have a good relationship and we find fertile ground. But 10 years ago, it was not ready to do so. So we have to take into account those time delays that sometimes can be huge if the institutional environment is not ready for it.
I think that's a perfect place to end, given that we're celebrating 50 years. We know that really this has taken us 50 years to really get where we are, and that was already building on a very long legacy. So I think in the interest of time and giving everyone a chance to have a cup of tea, I'm going to close this session. We have a 30-minute break. Ed, is there anything that I need to say that I have not said that's on my instructions? Okay, there you are. Of course you are. Of course you are.
Fiona, thank you for educating us all about the breadth of and scope of MIT influence and the questions that are posed elsewhere in the world. And we do hope that there will be the conferences being held in Louvain and in China and the like, covering the same kinds of issues that we're covering here, and hopefully talking about how they are impacting us and our change and the like. So thank you very much. And we are going to now have a half-hour break. And during that break, I urge you to go check out the demos and see what's going on. And then we will be coming back for our last session of the afternoon here at 4:45. It's 4:15 now. Fiona's done a marvelous job of bringing us back in line with our schedule. Thank you, and we'll be talking to you during the half hour.